It is that time again, and we are glad you joined us this week for the Unknown Webcast. I have been contacted from a few who have been watching who mentioned that they noticed that I am so conservative, I have trouble turning left even when I'm driving. That is a word of caution for those who may be easily offended. This is not a safe place for snowflakes. This is broadcast number 61, and my friend Dr. Scott Matchurch is joining us to talk about being an evangelical ambassador to the religions of Parliament of the World's Religions. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of tonight's webcast, if I can get my tongue untangled from my iTunes so I can see what I'm saying.
Well, okay then. Greetings from sunny Florida, where, of course, the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and so now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this evening are World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for dubious doctrines, half-baked heresies, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet, and Reese's Jesus Buddha Cups, two great faiths that taste great together. Reese's Jesus Buddha Cups, and of course, they don't supply all of the support that we need. In fact, they actually provide none of it. So please go to midwestoutreach.org, and if you like this show, click on the yellow donate button, or if you don't like it and you just want to annoy people with it, click on the yellow donate button and help us keep this going.
I like the idea of annoying people with it, probably the best.
I do too. And if you'll pardon me, my cat wants out of my office, so I'm going to get up for a second here.
Uh-oh. Does that mean we get to see the backside of Ron Hensel? Tonight's guest is friend Dr. Scott Matchurch. He and his wife and children are part of something called I Hope International. Maybe not just part of it, but he may have founded it. I Hope International. And he is a trained apologist, graduate of Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a cohort in invading the Parliament of World's Religions, which we're going to talk about tonight. Dr. Scott, tell us a little about I Hope International.
It's a nonprofit that we started about 7 years ago, and it's mainly for teaching around the world to bring apologetics or just biblical training to those who can't afford it. So a lot of mission emphasis to what we do. But as we're going to teach, we also meet people's needs. So we drill freshwater wells. We started an orphanage in India. We started a Bible school in India. So wherever we can help meet the needs, then that's what we try to do as we're going to teach.
Okay. Cool. All right, so the primary emphasis is taking apologetics out to indigenous people, I guess would be the word we want to use, right? And those who are native to their countries, and do training and that sort of thing, but then you do other sorts of mission work as part and parcel of what you're doing. That's good.
Yeah.
And you've been doing that for 7 years, and you take your wife and children. What are their names?
My wife is Jana, and our daughters are Anastasia, Karis, and Petra.
Anastasia, Karis, and Petra, and they are kind of with you everywhere. Do you do homeschooling, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do, and they are with me most everywhere. So they like to travel and see things and experience things. So they were at the Parliament of World Religions with us too.
They were, and we have a picture of at least one of them there with you. I didn't get all the pictures in because I have other things to show.
Yeah.
But as we kind of get into this tonight, one of the things that we have started doing, Ron likes the idea of the Golden Facepalm Award. I think the first one we did was with Hank Hanegraaff, if I recall. So we are going to move to that tonight. We want to get it up early so we can pick on someone quickly and get that over with.
Well, we have to recognize mediocrity and embarrassing things. We have to reward things by calling attention to them. So let's do that. Our Golden Facepalm Award tonight goes to a well. Let's take a look. There's an article that was in the July 21st Associated Press release that went out, and this particular copy of it is from the Washington Post. And I especially want you to notice something. I didn't have time to move it, but if you can see the name, Bruce Schreiner, maybe you can't see the AP. I think it's a little low there. This is an Associated Press article. And the third paragraph refers to Operation Save America as a Christian fundamentalist group. What makes this so interesting is that in the Associated Press's own style book, it refers to fundamentalism as a term that has pejorative connotations. And the Associated Press's style book, which I assume Bruce Schreiner has a copy of, advises journalists in general do not use the word fundamentalist unless a group applies the word to itself. Well, Bruce Schreiner not only used the word without this group applying it to itself, but within a couple of days, other news outlets such as the CBS Evening News were also referring to this as a fundamentalist group, apparently following the Associated Press's lead. Now, I was asking our guest Scott and our co-host Don before the show, do fundamentalist groups strike you as the kind of groups that picket abortion clinics? And your answer was?
No.
No. And the reason being?
Separation. They practice separation.
Right. If you were to be one of these abortion picketers, you're probably going to have to cooperate with other denominations, and that would contaminate you. So that's that makes it unlikely that any pro-life group is a fundamentalist group, and in this case, this group does not call itself one. So this week's winner of the coveted Golden Facepalm Award from the Canned Laughter Festival is Bruce Schreiner of the Associated Press for referring to a pro-life organization using the term his own organization defines as pejorative, that is negative or even derogatory, not exactly unbiased journalism, would you guys say? The Golden Facepalm Award from the Festival du Canned Laughter. And you have had it. Now you know you've been had.
Now you know you've been had. That's right. We have shown you, and now you know you have been had. We are getting echoing somewhere.
I've noticed it, and we were taking every precaution.
I have. I've been going through to make sure I got all my stuff turned off that is unnecessary, but that isn't helping.
Okay.
So I guess we're going to have to put up with it.
Yeah. Usually that's caused by the fact that we used to be caused by the fact that we weren't wearing headphones.
Right, and there's only one offender right now.
Oh, okay.
So, all right. Anyway, the Parliament of the World's Religions. That's what our subject is tonight. And Scott has been there. Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Is that any better? Yeah, that seems to be better if I move up on my mic.
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay, I'll try that. No, that's no better. We have echoing. Can't do anything about it.
I don't hear any echoing.
We hear it really loudly.
I don't know.
Okay, well, go ahead, Don. Keep us rolling.
Okay, I'm going to try. The Parliament of the World's Religions was the last year. It was in Salt Lake City. Was that the first time you were at the Parliament?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The first time I was there was in 1993. The first one they ever held was in 1893 in Chicago. I'm not quite that old, so I wasn't at that one. And it was mostly made up of Christian denominations, but they invited this young guy from India, the Swami Vivekananda, and he sort of captivated the audience when he was there. He had apparently a good, interesting speaking style, and everyone really liked him. So then it didn't occur again until 1993, and they had it again in Chicago. And I and about a dozen other evangelicals went to kind of see what they were doing and what they were up to, and found it interesting because sort of the idea is we want to have all of the religious views kind of on an equal footing. We want to respect one another, figure out ways to work together. Kind of, we were talking, Ron, you were talking a moment about separatists. They want to sort of eliminate that idea and proposing that all religions really are trying to accomplish the same thing. And they had, of course, Hindus and Muslims. We spent some time with a Muslim contingent, and new groups that I knew very little about. Wiccans, for example. In fact, I'll show this one slide if you'll bear with me a second. Here we go, Lady Olivia. Oops, I went too far one. There we go. This here is Lady Olivia, the late Lady Olivia. Now, she started the Fellowship of Isis. And she has underneath her, we have her table. This is ISIS altar of worship that they had at the Parliament in 1993. And we spent a fair amount of time talking with her, trying to figure out exactly what is it that you're trying to accomplish. What do you believe, and why do you believe it, and what are you trying to accomplish? And she was very excited about being part of the Parliament because she felt like it gave them credibility. Now, this other picture we have right here is from last year's Parliament, which was in Salt Lake City, and it is a group of chaplains. It's sort of a international chaplaincy where their theme is that all religions are saying the same thing. We're all trying to get to the same place ultimately. We'll look at a few more photos here in a minute. Oh, stop. Okay. So that was my first experience with the Parliament of the World's Religions. And when I was there in 1993, my wife Joy and I were with the Muslim contingent, and we asked the wife of the head of the Muslim contingent, "Why are you here?" And she told a fairly compelling story. She said, I moved from my country to Naperville, Illinois, which at the time was about 30 miles sort of south west of us. And she said, and I noticed that we didn't have a place for the men to pray on Fridays. And so I started opening my house on Fridays and laying out the prayer carpet so they could come and pray on Fridays. And then she said, I was going to go home to visit my country. I was going to be gone for about a month. And I became very concerned because who would open my house for the men to pray? And she said, my neighbor, a Christian lady, came over, knocked on my door, and asked if she could open my house and prepare the room for people to pray. Apparently, she went to an evangelical church and was trying to build a friendship with her. And she said, I was so touched by that when this event came up, I thought, I wanted to go there because we need peace in my country. My family is being killed by other religious groups. And so I am hoping to bring about peace. Lady Olivia, who we showed a minute ago from the Fellowship of ISIS, was there for more credibility and recognition, also wanting peaceful coexistence between religions. So that is kind of the theme of the Parliament. Wouldn't you say, Scott, that is the main theme there?
Yes, I think you're right.
Okay. And in doing that, do they actually promote tolerance, or do they sort of practice a form of intolerance, would you say?
Well, they sort of do both. So they tolerate everyone that they want to tolerate, and they're intolerant to everyone that they don't tolerate. So they pick and choose who they're going to like and who they're not going to like.
Okay. So how is that different from someone who is labeled intolerant?
Well, I guess it depends on who's defining it. So we would think what they're doing could be classified as being intolerant, but that's not politically correct. So then we just have to, agree with whatever they're saying, sort of, or at least we try to agree without causing a I don't know what without being offensive.
Without being disagreeable, to disagree without being disagreeable. I do have to say, even though there are fundamental areas that we would not agree with the parliament on, they attempt, I think, to reach across the board to try to incorporate and include those with whom they would normally disagree. For example, they allowed you to do a presentation there, and you were clearly an evangelical, and let them know that you're an evangelical, right?
Yeah. So that was good, and perhaps they were doing it just to fill a quota. I'm not sure, because it's not like they've ever heard of me and said, hey, this is like Desmond Tutu or something, so we definitely have to have him. So they apparently either were using a quota system, or they liked my topic, I guess, too.
Okay, and what was your topic? In fact, I'm going to do a couple more slides of pictures here because one of the slides actually has you doing a presentation. So
yes, that's right.
Let me get that up here. Present to everyone. And now I'm going to. Okay, now this slide, by the way, just so people know what we're looking at, these are Buddhists, and they are doing some of their chanting.
Which one? There's 4 pictures. Which are the Buddhists?
Okay, the top center. Do you see an arrow on there?
No, I don't. We don't. Okay. I don't see your cursor.
Okay. No curses. All right. In the top center is Buddhist monks, and they are chanting. And the left center is a group of American Indians. They were sort of central almost to the theme last year, as they are bringing about sort of nature, earth worship sorts of things. And so they had the American Indians up on stage drumming, and as everyone marched in. On the right center are various other religions shown there. And then the bottom, what is the bottom center there, Scott?
So that's a picture of my daughter, Karis, and she was talking to the chairman of the Parliament of World Religions, Imam Malik Mujahid, who's an imam in Chicago. And he was very gracious, and he was the guy leading the whole thing. So he took the time to talk to her and see how she liked it, what she liked, and then he personally invited her to come back to the next one. So
cool.
She was very happy. And then, as you could see, he kneeled down on the floor and just to talk to her at eye level. So he was very kind and very he seemed to be very genuine in what he was trying to do.
Was that gentleman a Muslim by any chance?
Yes. So he's the imam in somewhere in Chicago.
So imam is his title. My question then is, many of the religions that are represented in this group, especially the Hindus, would be considered idolatrous by the Muslims, idol worshippers, and so on. And the more radical groups like the Taliban and ISIS, they don't tolerate that kind of a thing. Does this imam represent a more moderate or liberal strain within Islam? Do you have any idea?
I don't know all of his personal views. I read some of his articles. He is a Sunni Muslim, so they are typically the ones that are more aggressive, I guess you would say, or more literal in their reading of the Quran or the Hadith. But at the same time, there are a lot of people that don't accept everything that Islam teaches. So even though he may be a Sunni, he may be slightly more liberal than some of the other ones. Okay. But he's still held firmly to his faith.
Okay. So you had some more pictures to show us, Don?
I do. I do. I do. Indeed, I do. And then, I mean, this is a little bit of show and tell, but I think it's important to get the flavor kind of what is going on at the Parliament. There's about 10 to 12,000 participants. Next year, it's going to be in Toronto. Now, in the upper left corner, we have Scott again. And who are you with there, Scott?
That's Shabir Ali. He's a famous Muslim speaker, debater. He's got a Master of Arts and a PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Toronto. He's debated well-known Christian philosophers such as William Lane Craig, Michael Licona, John Dominic Crossan, James White, Jay Smith, and David Wood. So he's, I guess you would say, he's the #1 Islamic debater right now for at least to the people we would know, not thing.
Okay, so it's interesting that he would be at this event because the event itself is really saying, look, all religions lead to the same place, and clearly he would not agree with that.
Yeah, that's right. So he was, he was there to make his voice heard, and even though he clearly does not agree with almost anyone else there because of his positions, he's a very fundamentalist Muslim scholar who takes the Quran and the Hadith literally, and if you listen to his debates, he's very good at debating, but that does not mean that he's always on the side of truth.
Okay, and then underneath that we have this is one of the signs there: rebirth the earth, and they are giving love notes to the earth. So, kind of the theme of last year's conference was Mother Nature is sick. The planet is in trouble. Does that sound familiar, by the way, Ron? And our mother who gave us birth is struggling and suffering. And so we're going to write love notes to mom so she can start feeling better. And we need to really kind of get our act together and clean up the kitchen a little better so that, so that mom can heal and do well. And the top right is Scott giving his presentation in a workshop. And it was a pretty packed out workshop too. There's several hundred people in there, if I recall. And you have there a quote on the nature of truth. Now, since I can't read it, maybe you might share what it was that you were suggesting here.
Yes, okay. I could probably pull that quote up and read it if I get closer to that slide here, which I can do. But my host called Hating Hatred. So one of the sub-themes of the conference was, hate speech. So I thought it would be wise if I was going to speak about one of the main sub-themes, then I would have a better chance of getting selected for the presentation. So that seemed to maybe take place as well. If I was just speaking of some topic that was of no interest to anyone, probably I would not have been selected. So basically what I was trying to do was to teach them, what hate is, what hate speech is. So I went through some legalese kind of things just so they would hear what a legal definition might be, how the different court cases, occurred in America to define that finally. And then I went in to talk about absolute truth, but I didn't call it that because I thought that, well, if you say you believe in absolute truth, that's going to turn off some of my listeners. And the last thing I want to do is turn anyone off. I'm there to try to reach them and just, help them to think things through without using labels that they're going to find divisive or offensive. Quote that I have on the screen here, which no one can probably see because it's a little bit too small, but I was talking about the nature of truth, and I was talking about the Muslim philosopher Avicenna, and he wrote that anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until he admits that to be beaten is not the same as not to be beaten, and to be burned is not the same as not to be burned. So I was trying to use this is a well-known Muslim scholar from centuries ago that is well accepted and well known, so that they will accept what he's saying, because what he's saying, is the law of non-contradiction, and we as Christians also believe this. So instead of me saying, this is what Don Vino says, or this is what some well-known Christian says, they won't readily accept it. So it's better to use their own sources so that they believe what you're saying.
Well, yeah, and what was interesting, because I was sitting in on your workshop at the time, is when you gave that quote, somebody got up in the middle of the quote and said, "I don't need to listen to this," and stormed out. And I thought, how interesting. All you're doing is saying that some things are true, some things are not true. We need to be able to know the difference between those. We're not saying that we have to agree on them even, but that we could agree disagreeably. But we should know that certain things are true, whether you like it or not.
You're talking about the quote about the law of non-contradiction?
Yes, the law of non-contradiction, right. Avicenna, right.
Did this guy make a big scene? Did he get up and say...
Yeah, he did, yes.
I don't have to listen to this, but you all have
to listen. I don't have to listen to this, and he stormed out.
I don't have to listen to this, but you have to listen to me saying that I don't have to listen to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so most of the people there were all kind and were all listening. There was pretty much only one heckler, and he started shouting a little bit during the middle. And but I think, when you're talking about hate speech, it's very unpopular for anyone in the audience to start disagreeing with you, because you're doing the very thing that your whole topic's against, and everybody knows it. So everybody was being very polite.
So what did he heckle you about? I mean, I think
well, I was talking about absolute truth, but I wasn't using those words. And he said, "You don't really believe that, do you?" And I was like, "Well, yes, I do." And then I was so thirsty from talking, so I just let him talk for maybe 10 seconds, or shout his opinion out, and then I was drinking water, and then so then I just went on, and then he left. But it wasn't any big deal. I mean, in a way, I was surprised that there was only one of them, and everybody else was very kind and gracious and listened. So I think it went very well, considering what could have happened.
So how do you talk about absolute truth without calling it absolute truth? What was your strategy, your rhetorical strategy here?
Well, I just use a lot of things that people already believe in. So I use some examples of, like, when you go to the bank and you say, "Hey, I would like to withdraw my $10,000. And they're like, "Well, it might be true for you, but it's not true for us. We think you only have $100. No one would accept a relative truth in that case. They want the absolute truth, that I have $10,000 in the bank.
And you use the word absolute?
No,
Okay.
Well, I'm just telling you,
right,
I don't remember all of the words I said, and I don't have all those slides in front of me to tell you. But I went through a series of examples like that of when you go to a doctor's, when you go to a lawyer, when you go to a financial institution. So, or even when you're driving your car, the light's either green or red or yellow, but green or red, it tells you to stop or go. So you don't just go through the green light, or you don't go through a red light just assuming that, hey, well, this is true for me but not for everyone else. So you have to get them to buy in on the argument without forcing our Christian viewpoint on them. So if they know they're already living their life that way, so you just play on what they already believe, and then you tie it into your argument.
Right. Well, Ravi Zacharias does a similar thing today. He tells a story about having dinner with a professor of philosophy who was arguing that there's Western truth and Eastern truth. Western truth is either or, Eastern truth is both and he goes through this long description of what that meal was like. And at the end, after the professor had made all of his examples and tried to build his case, Rafi looked at him and said, "Well, okay, but even in India, where I grew up, we look both ways before we cross the street, because it is either the bus or me. It isn't both." And that does seem to win out. But, if you can do it in a gentle way, sometimes people will listen.
Well, what they're really protecting here by asserting that there is an alternate view of truth, that some things can be true for you and not be true for me, or it can be both and instead of either or. What they're really doing is they're carving out the sphere of the metaphysical, that is the area beyond beyond our sensory perception, the area of faith and the area of morals. Those are pretty much what they're protecting. They want those parts of reality to be governed by a different set of laws,
Right.
than the one that they live by. And so what we're essentially asserting is you have no basis for assuming that the law of truth or non-contradiction or whatever is different when it comes to things we can't see than it is when it comes to things we can see. Isn't that what we're saying?
It is, and I appreciate Scott going there and being able to give a presentation. I don't know that I could develop a theme that would be as acceptable. Although, because we are publishers, we have our journal that goes out, and we have our webcast and all sorts of things. I was allowed to come in as press, which was very helpful to me, and it allowed me to get into and talk to people that I might not normally be able to interview, for example. And the Parliament was very concerned that they did allow evangelicals to participate as press, as well as giving presentations. So, I think they are trying to practice this idea of sort of inclusivism. We want you to be here, with the recognition that we're not going to all agree. But they'd like to see that happen in a peaceful way. They actually have changed some of their documents. In 1993, they were pretty insistent that all religions had to affirm that all religious claims were true. Since then, they have changed that. I think they had probably a lot of backlash. But they also had a guy by the name of Robert Mueller. That is not this guy who's doing the Trump research, but
Okay.
he was Secretary of the UN for about 40 years, and he was very instrumental in getting the Parliament off the ground in 1993. And the reason was that he really believed that in order for the UN to be effective, they had to have a religious element involved. And so the Parliament of the World's Religions for him was a way to incorporate religions into the work of the UN. And the Parliament has been, since that time, tried to become an arm of or extension of the UN as religious ambassadors. So that's what they're trying to accomplish. That's one of the things that they're trying to accomplish as a group.
Okay. Well, you know what, Don? We probably need to hear from one of our sponsors.
Yeah, I think it is time.
Yes, well, we need to hear from our friends at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. And so they've got some questions. Are you still trying to figure out how to clean up in the ministry business? Do you want to finally learn how to get to the bottom of growing a successful church? Would you like to flush away your failures and start having your best church now? Well, then you need Charlatan Ultra Soft, because nothing says theologically soft like Joel Osteen's Charlatan Ultra Soft. It's been personally tested by the man himself. It provides comfort where it counts. It wipes away even the most stubborn orthodoxy. Comes with a money-back guarantee. Keep those butts in the pews with Charlatan Ultra Soft, available at World's End Theology Outlet. And now we're back.
Joel Osteen. Anyway, the Parliament of the World's Religions, your impression, Scott, now that you've been there and kind of were able to take in a lot of the event, not only visually but experientially, you and Jana and the girls, what did you see when you were there? What am I trying to ask? If you were talking to an evangelical that had never been there, what would you say to get their minds thinking about, why should I attend something like this?
Well, the conversations that you can have with the different people there are can be very life-changing for someone. Even if you're not speaking at the event, there's still thousands and thousands of people you can meet with and talk to. like in the what you call it, the demonstration hall, where they have lots of displays set up, the different religions. I mean, you can get to more world religions in one day there than you can anywhere else. Kind, and they're all trying to give you their views on the world and reality. So they're open to hearing what you have to say, or you can just ask them tough questions. You know, well, view is true, or how do you think that mirrors reality? And then, you know, so you don't want to just go up to somebody and tell them, hey, your view is wrong and here's why. You want them to think for themselves. So you do what like Socrates did. You ask them questions and you lead them in the direction that leads them to the truth. And, you know, you don't have to convince somebody instantly, you know, in your first conversation that Christianity is the true religion. Just there to do your part to get them one step closer to where they need to be down the road. You know, we may just be there planting seeds or just watering, you know, and somebody else years later may come and some of these people might get saved. So every Christian should be there to at least do their job and witness. And there were like 10,000 people there. And as far as we know, there's probably only, you know, I don't know, 20 to 100 probably at the most evangelical Christians. And probably the ones that were there were the ones we knew personly. You know, there may not have been very many.
I don't think it was 100. I think it was closer to 20.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and some of the things that were really helpful to me the first time I went, and then they were helpful to inform me this time. The first time I went, like I said, I spent a fair amount of time with the Wiccan groups, and there were 2 or 3 there. The Fellowship of Isis, the Covenant of the Goddess was probably the largest one. And the Covenant of the Goddess, they had one of their PR persons there was a guy named Donald Frew, very interesting guy. Has no real experience with Christianity, had not grown up in the church. And the little experience he had with Christianity was not good experience. So he came to our suite. We had he was in there with us maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours. It was myself and about 4 or 5 other evangelicals just talking about, okay, what is it you actually believe? Because I know what I have heard Wiccans believe, and then came to discover that very little of it was true. You know, they don't believe in a personal being named Satan, for example. They don't do a lot of the rituals that are we are told that they perform. Yes, they perform magic. They would call it white magic, not black magic. But as you start talking to them, then you find different ways to ask them questions about what they believe. And you know, so their concept is that they, for example, Bill Hunsberger developed a talk called "Why Not Burn Witches," in part due to that, because the idea is truth is relative, which is what you were talking about. There is no absolute truth. And if there is no absolute truth, on what basis could you say it would be right or wrong to burn witches? You really couldn't. You could only say it's your personal opinion one way or the other. And that seems problematic. Michael Frew's response, as we talked to him about the faith, was that he felt Christians were liars. Why did he say that? Because his experience was Mike Warnke and Satan Seller. And other kinds of books, Lauren Stratford and Satan's Underground, both of which are complete and abject lies. And so his view is that Christians are liars. As we got done talking, he said, you know, if I thought being a Christian is what you guys are, I would do it right away. But I think you're an anomaly. I think Warnke and Stratford are closer representations of what Christians truly are. Now, that's sad to me.
Well, when you look at how many Christians have followed those people and listened to them and given them credence, Mike Warnke was once extremely popular among a very broad, you know, bandwidth of evangelicalism. So, yeah, unfortunately, that perpetuates the stereotype that they've created in their minds. Dr. Scott, you said earlier that all Christians should go to the Parliament of World Religions. That would be an interesting phenomenon if it occurred. when I'm looking at these pictures that Don is showing, and I'm thinking, I'm also thinking about the average Christians in the pews that I'm very familiar with. Some of them are my family, some of them are people I know very well. And I see these pictures and I see putting these people in that environment, and I see them breaking out in hives immediately and wanting to get to the nearest exit. It's like talking about being out of my comfort zone. You're going to ask me to share my faith with people. Just being in the same room with them is intimidating. What would you say to people who this is like the last thing on earth they would think of doing, and yet you just go right in there and do it?
Well, one of the things I was thinking after I said that, I should add the disclaimer: every well-equipped Christian should go. So, we don't necessarily want new Christians to go that either don't know how to share their faith, or they're not grounded in the faith, so that they may be confused or tricked by some of the things that are said there. We want the people that are strong in the Christian faith, that can defend the Christian faith, that can reach out with grace and love to the people that are searching.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right.
Well, some people, I would even say that you don't necessarily have to be an expert. If you could just share your testimony, what Jesus means to you, what salvation has done for you, it's difficult to argue with a personal testimony. I would be comfortable with a Christian who was very sure of his or her faith, but did not necessarily know how to engage a Hindu or a Jain or somebody. But if I knew that this person is not going to be taken in by this other faith, but they are going to be able to express what their faith means to them. But yeah, there are people who you don't know. I mean, are they going to, is it going to cause a crisis in their spiritual life if they hear a question that they can't answer yet? Should I not present that information to them in a more controlled setting than some the Parliament of World Religions, for example? So,
well, it might present a crisis. I don't know that crisis is necessarily a bad thing, because it can drive you to the place of looking for answers. I think they have to know that there are answers available who to go to with them. And I would say they probably shouldn't just venture in on their own. Like Scott said, they should be a strong Christian, or maybe as part of their discipleship process, they should go with a group of individuals who already are pretty well versed in this kind of stuff, just to even stand by and watch the dialogue, because it should be done gently and respectful. I think Scott's presentation was gentle and respectful. He didn't waver. He was told the truth, but he wasn't unnecessarily pejorative, and that's I think important. My friend Bill McKeever was there, Mormonism Research Ministries, and he was completely in awe, I think is probably the word, because he'd never been to an event like that. Others, like our friend Bill Hunsberger, is with Haven Ministry. He goes to psychic fairs and a assortment of other kinds of things. This is a really big version of something like that. So his people are well versed in this already. Bill McKeever had never seen it, so for a while he just mostly tagged along with me. And for example, we stopped by the Circle Sanctuary, which is another Wiccan group, and they're geographically about 2 hours north of where we are here in Wonder Lake. And as we talked with them, I was asking questions. Well, what do you believe? What do you do? As it turns out, they are the oldest 501c3 Wiccan religion in the U.S. And they have about 200-acre campus in Wisconsin. And they were just approved to do natural burials. In other words, you don't need coffins there, just natural burials. And they were excited about that. And so I asked if we wanted to bring a group up there to kind of talk with them and see what they believe and look at their facility and that sort of thing. Could we do that? And she said, "Oh no, you're evangelicals, and we really wouldn't want you to come up here." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she said, "Well, because you'll try to evangelize us." And I said, "Oh, okay. So let me ask you a question, just so I understand what you mean by that. Are you saying that we would try to persuade you to believe what we believe versus what you believe now?" And she goes, "Yes." I said, "Okay, so isn't it the case, just so I understand this, that you are here, you have a booth in the exhibition hall in an attempt to persuade others to believe what you believe as being true? Isn't that evangelism? She stopped and she looked at me and she said, okay, you can come.
So did you go?
I haven't yet, but we would like to put a group together, I think, to do that. Probably not this year, but maybe next year. Because I think it would be interesting. Most Christians have the wrong idea about Wiccans. Now, they need to hear the gospel just like anybody else, because what they believe is false. And when you try to claim that truth is relative, as Wiccans do, as Scott points out in his presentation, it just sort of falls on its face, because there is a difference, as Avicina points out, between being burned and not being burned, and between being beaten and not being beaten. There is an objective reality that there's a difference between those two. Truth is not relative. It is absolute. And so either the gospel is true or it's not true, but we can present it in a kind way. And usually it's better if we understand what the other person believes, so that we can talk to them in terms that they'll understand.
Just seems to me that Avicina may have had anger issues too, so we have to take that into account. He got a little upset with people who denied the existence of absolute truth. Yes, beat them until they say, there you go.
Until they know the difference between being beaten and not being beaten, right?
Yes, there you go. That's a very, giving a reason for the hope that is within you with meekness and fear. Yes. So,
yes. I thought of something interesting. After I gave my presentation, there were different scholars in the room too that were university professors with PhDs and things. And the one guy that was up on the stage with me, you couldn't see him in that photo. He also gave presentations, and he taught Islamic theology, and he was some expert. And so then after my presentation, he came up to me and I used some different quotes from Muhammad that he had said, and he had never heard them, so he was asking me for my source. So I gave him the source, and I sort of thought it was odd that this Islamic scholar wasn't aware of this well-known biography, or apparently hadn't read the whole thing. It's like 700 pages. But that's where I had gotten those quotes, and then so it was pretty interesting that even this Islamic scholar learned some things about his own religion from me, because he was denying what I said until he realized, oh, it was a direct quote from this Islamic source. And then at the end, I was surprised at how many people came up to me afterwards that said how interesting what I had to say was, how much they agreed with it. I had some Hindu girls come up, and they couldn't believe, about hearing about the truth, because they could sense that it was real, and they could sense that it was true, but they had never thought of it that way, because if they're in the Hindu world religion, they don't talk about absolutes, and they don't talk about truth in the same way that we do. And they were just, they acted like their eyes were just open, and they were just really impressed, and they couldn't believe it. And so, I was very glad at the reception that I got, because I thought for sure, there'd be people that, or nobody would come up to you, but there were a whole bunch of people that came up, and all the comments were good, except for that one heckler in the middle. Every other comment was good.
Well, and I have found that to be true, because we have an interesting dynamic going on that we don't have most of the time when we are meeting people in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, and shopping, or whatever, and that is they are already there and open to spiritual discussions. That's what they came there for. And so when you engage someone in a conversation, it's already expected that they're going to talk about spiritual things. And so to be able to ask the right questions and to give serious, credible answers in a inviting way, with gentleness and respect, as Ron pointed out already, can be compelling. It can be helpful when we were there in 1993, Joy struck up a friendship with the wife of the Muslim leader and his daughter, and probably for a year or so, they wrote back and forth to each other, sharing views, sharing the gospel, those kinds of things. Now, I don't know if they will ever become believers or not, but it was a place to begin. It was a place to start, and it started with A, being respectful, B, asking them, what do you believe about? Like at one point, Joy looked at the Muslim. This was kind of fun. I hadn't really thought about this at the time. It was afterwards, but imagine you're at the parliament and you have these Wiccan groups, and the one Wiccan group, the Covenant of the Goddess, their women had the best costumes, and so they kind of were up on stage almost at every event. Wiccans, Muslims don't believe in witchcraft, and Christians don't believe in witchcraft. And so at one point, Joy is on the couch with the wife of the Muslim imam, and she leans over, she goes, I know what they're doing here, but what are we doing here exactly? And that's when the woman opened up about wanting to have peaceful coexistence because her family in her home country is being killed by Hindus. And they actually had a fight. I don't know if you knew this, Scott. In 1993, they had a big fight break out in the main auditorium during one of the sessions. And so as soon as that happened, I think it was the Hindus and the Muslims started in a fist fight of some kind. The Wiccans jumped up and started a circle dance, and they had to call the Chicago police, and it was a huge mess. So even there, they have a difficult time sometimes with peaceful coexistence. But it's an interesting place to practice your presentation of the gospel and engage people in discussion on matters of faith and religion.
Just curious, were there any representatives from any of the branches of Judaism there?
Yes. Both. Last year there was. There pretty much always is. And in 1993 there was. Now, 93 was different because Louis Farrakhan was also scheduled as a speaker. And when he arrived, the Jewish contingent all left. Of course, Farrakhan's pretty anti-Semitic, so that would make sense. Yep. I don't think they've duplicated that problem again. They've been a little more careful about those kinds of things, at least.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the guys that was there is Rabbi David Saperstein, who's the U.S. ambassador at large for the International Religious Freedom. And then he's an attorney, and he's done some other legal counsel at the Union for Reform Judaism. So that was just one of the guys I remember. And, another thing I was just thinking is when we heard all these speakers at a lot of the plenary sessions, these people were very intellectual, very intelligent. They were well spoken. They a whole bunch of the things that they were talking about made sense, because they were talking about how you can stop wars, how you can, help make peace a reality, or, feed the hungry. So a whole bunch of that we could agree with. So it wasn't like we were there disagreeing with every single thing everybody said. So it was, we could learn a lot too. So we did learn a lot about how to, be more charitable, more loving, more kind, meet people's needs where they're at. And one of the interesting things that the Sikhs do is they have what's called a langar. Did you go to that, Dawn, by chance? The big meal?
I did not.
Okay.
I have a strict policy. I don't eat anything that I can't identify.
Yeah. So my wife and I and our family, we went to it, and so the Sikhs there fed everybody every single day if you were interested in going. So there were thousands of people every single day that would eat there, and one of the reasons is because their founder, Guru Nanak, he taught that each and every person deserved to eat regardless of their gender, race, creed, or caste. So this is like a big symbolic gesture for the Sikhs to reach out to people. And the food was very good. It was very good Indian food. It was, no animals used, it was all vegetarian. but it was very well done, and my girls loved it, and my wife, she grew up in Indonesia, so she loves foreign food. So it was very well done, and I think it cost them like $100,000 just to feed everybody, and they raised donations for it. So that was impressive, and that's something that we as Christians can learn to do or do better as well. We have a lot of food kitchens around the country and around the world that helps people, but it's always insightful of what we can learn by how somebody else is doing something and incorporate it into our own lives, because there's nothing wrong with helping people and feeding people. That's something that can open a lot of doors. So one of the reasons that we drill fresh water wells is because if we get into a village that's unreached of Hindus or something, as soon as the Christians come in and drill a well to take care of the village, then that opens a tremendous amount of doors. So after we've drilled wells, then some churches were planted by some of the people we've worked with, and they just welcome us in then as Christians, when before they didn't want anything to do with us.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about the Parliament, kind of in that vein, for them to meet up with evangelical Christians who are solidly biblical. We would be biblically fundamentalist, even though we have maybe a different take on what that means. We take the Bible in its historical grammatical context fundamentally. And yet we do recognize that we need to live in a culture that is pluralistic, because there's people of all different faiths. If we didn't live in that kind of a culture, then there would be no reason to evangelize, right? So part of the point of evangelizing is because you're living among people who are not Christians, who are not believers. And so it gives you an opportunity to be among people with whom you would have a very different religious view, and they would be able to see you in a different light, to be able to engage them, as you point out with these Hindu girls, to make a presentation that's going to actually cause them to come to a recognition that there is absolute truth, which is a concept they had not grown up with, something new to them. We had that with some Wiccans as well, as we would talk with some of the youths who had been raised in Wicca. And they were kind of lost. They didn't really even know, how do I even know what to believe anymore if there is no absolute truth? And so we could talk with them about those things and be engaging in our delivery. That's really important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ron, we have done both of our commercials, or we have another one?
Well, we still have to hear from one of our sponsors here. So one day, Rob Bell was walking along, not watching where he was going, and he smacked right into the Dalai Lama. Boom. And the Dalai Lama said, "Hey, you got Christianity in my Buddhism." And Rob Bell said, "You got Buddhism in my Christianity." And then they decided that it's not all about truth, but experience. And isn't taste one of the best experiences? And two great faiths that taste great together. This is why you should try Reese's Jesus Buddha Cups. And that is our commercial for the last one for the day.
And you know what? It's interesting that you did have that one, because almost every year the Dalai Lama is either at the Parliament or does a pre-filmed sort of webcast that they play. Last year was no different. He was sick, so he wasn't there personally, but he had sent a video greeting. And he's he's kind of an engaging sort of a guy. Now, we are not advocating, as this little satirical ad did, that we meld Buddhism and Christianity together, because they don't. They are clearly different religious worldviews. And we would be deceptive and false if we tried to claim that they are the same. They're not. They're clearly different. So, but we have an opportunity here at things like the Parliament of World Religions to engage people who are already open to spiritual discussion, to give presentations, as Scott has done, and I think you're gonna submit again for next year, aren't you?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Scott is going to submit for next year, and maybe a couple of others will do that as well. I know I'm talking with Dr. Richard Howe as well, because I think it would be great to continue engaging them. As you point out, Scott, a lot of the people in leadership are pretty well educated, but most of them are not really familiar with evangelicals. Their concept oftentimes, well, let me share my experience. In 1993, when I was there, as we were arriving, there was a group outside of fundamental Christians with signs and bullhorns telling everyone they were going to hell. Now, even though that is true, that's probably not the best way to present it, because it doesn't gain you a hearing. I think what we're advocating is something more like we see Paul doing in Acts 17, where he's walking into this sort of marketplace of religious ideas and taking the opportunity to sometimes take center stage to give a clear presentation of the gospel using, as Scott has done, their scholars and poets, and pointing out that their worldview really leads you ultimately to the gospel if you follow it. Would you agree with that, Scott?
Yeah, that's right. Now, not everything in their worldview might lead to it, but there's a whole bunch that does. So then we just pick out the pieces that are true, and then I just show them that, and they agree with it because they've already accepted that part of their worldview, and it helps them to take one step further down the path to the truth and to understanding that Christianity, as we believe, is the true worldview.
Okay. So we're about to wrap it up here for the night, and we don't really have too many questions coming in, so too bad for them. Next year, though, the Parliament of World Religions is November 1 through 7 in Toronto. The tickets, if you go individually right now, are like at $290 per person. They will be going up around August 15th. You can go in groups of 10 or more for a discounted rate. I would suggest any who are out there, this is an opportunity to take sort of a missions group. Do apologetic training. You've got a whole year to prepare for that. Purchase your tickets now. And plan on taking a group up there. Hook up with us or because there's a couple of groups that will be up there, it is an exhilarating time. It gives you really a great opportunity to meet with people of other faiths, to talk with them and find out why they believe what they believe, to participate, as Scott said, go to the Langar, and that's how you say that, right? Langar. And enjoy a meal with them and get to know some of the Sikhs and some of the Wiccans and some of the other groups, and engage them in conversation to ultimately get to the place of sharing the gospel. Because if we haven't done that, we really haven't done what is necessary to their eternal salvation. So,
do they have a theme picked out for next year?
I believe they do, but I'd have to look back on their website. That's you can look them up. Parliament of the World's Religions. They have a website.
Yeah, parliamentofreligions.org.
Yeah, and I don't recall what the theme is, but they do have a theme already. Last year it was kind of taking care of the earth, and so they did a lot of stuff on climate change and those sorts of things. But noticeably, they didn't have the opposing views represented. And so, the Parliament has come out solidly for the idea that humans cause climate change. But we can challenge that. So, all right, Ron, would you walk us out of here?
I would be more than happy to. It's time to give credit to where credit, or to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummis. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur, our special correspondent for cults, based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying flying turkeys? Ode to humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes from Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami, director of privacy assurance, wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for its content, but you'll never be able to prove that in a court of law. And please stop by midwestoutreach.org, look for that yellow donate button and give it a click, and do something after that too. We'd appreciate it.
Right. All right, all. We will talk to you later. Next week we have Joe Whitchurch on from Ratio Christi in Indianapolis, and we have yet to decide what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure it'll be fun and interesting. So, Scott, thanks for being on with us tonight, and I look forward to seeing what you're going to do next year at the Parliament. It'll be fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope to see you there, and I hope to see you giving a presentation too.
All right. Talk to you later.